Hello and thank you once again for joining me for another video on the Walford Weekly YouTube channel. This week I put a tweet out and a message on our Facebook group, all the details now along the bottom of the screen for how you can get in touch with us on our social media. And I wanted to know what your opinions were with what Kate Oates and John Sen have been up to, because it's been almost 2 years. Obviously been a little less for John Sen. He was introduced a little bit after Kate Oates, by Kate Oates of course. It was a hire by her to become the new executive producer of EastEnders. I mean, a lot of things have changed, and so I think that it's only fair that we kind of compare and contrast and reflect and have a look at what you guys think, and perhaps I might throw in my opinion of what I think at the same time. So the original message was, what's your thoughts of the Sen and Oates era on EastEnders? Have you returned to the soap and enjoyed the changes, or a long time watcher and haven't really noticed anything different? What irks you and what fills you with excitement? Let me know. And my goodness, you did let me know. Thank you to everyone, by the way, who sent us a message on our Twitter and our Facebook group. I'm not going to read every single one of them, but I've kind of collected them up and put them into sections of what people have kind of thought and given their point of views of. We're starting off with Matt Cherry on Facebook. He wrote, the strongest suit of this era might very well be the new actors who have been brought onto the scene. We have some top-notch recasts, Ben, Bobby and Dottie, and new characters portrayed by talented performers, Gray, Chantel, Suki and Leo. Yes, we really have. We've had some really good recasts actually. Some particularly notable ones are Bobby and Ben. Ben being very much a surprise. A lot of people weren't sure, weren't very enthusiastic about it. They kind of liked the one that had just gone and they wanted to bring that one back. We can all now understand why they changed Ben, because I think they needed a new casting for the direction they, I guess, first anticipated they were going to take, and they kind of diverted direction a little bit. But that's not to take away from Max Bowden. He is doing a really fantastic job with the role he's been put into. There is, however, a counter-argument from @NoirFullMoon. There's been a few fair issues still, a lot of which are more apparent as the years gone on, casting new characters and families to have them barely feature for months, and even when they do, they are awful. Jags. And that's not my words, that's his or hers. And you're absolutely right. Jags and the Palliser brothers have really been lost. Although at the time of this filming, they seem to be starting to have a bit more of an exciting role. That's thanks in part or mainly because of Suki. Suki has been a real good introduction and has elevated the Palliser brothers really from being what seemed to be quite a mundane, bad boys group, mentality, kind of want to cause trouble in the square, starting this rap elimination business, which don't really know. Going back to the recast and the introduction of new characters, I think have been quite a gold standard with Kate Oates. She has got a great history of being able to cast people. She's shown that in the past with Coronation Street. She was very much able to cast the right actors for the right role. Bobby has been great, the actor, and Ben. Peter's just been reintroduced as well, and I am very excited about seeing what he has to offer too. So this is interesting. A lot of people have quite strong opinions of Kate Oates over John Sen, believing that she is going or has been ruining the show and using Coronation Street as actually an example of this. @SteeGaz13 put, she's going to ruin Easties like she did with Corrie, and @Dame Mariah said, John feels like a good influence for the show. Kate, however, seems to be damaging it. I'm only assuming it's her influence because it's the same stuff she's been doing with the other two soaps. Kidnappings, abandoned warehouses and senseless killing sprees is her shtick. We have to remember this is perhaps the reason why Kate Oates has been introduced, is because with Coronation Street she really did pull in the ratings. She brought back the show from a real dire situation. People weren't watching it. It perhaps had a demographic where it was a bit more older, and so it wasn't getting the younger audience that they so desperately needed. And EastEnders has always been able to capture a younger audience, but again, because of Netflix and streaming and people like wanting to have a lot more things on demand, perhaps started to lose its way too. So it's obvious that that's why Kate Oates had been brought in. I can't speak for John Sen necessarily, but we know he's an excellent writer, he's an excellent director, and he's an excellent producer of programming. He has a good history, hence why he's been asked to do the show too. EastEnders has always had a history of dark storylines and being perhaps the more depressing soap, and I think that suits Kate Oates much better on EastEnders than it perhaps would have suited Coronation Street. There's a really funny interview, I don't know if it'll be online, with Lorraine Kelly, and it's just before she leaves the soap, funnily enough, so wherever Lorraine Kelly pushed her to basically jump ship, who knows. And Kate Oates had just introduced the male rape storyline onto Coronation Street. And although Lorraine said on the interview, oh, what happened to the fluffy, light, happy storylines of Coronation Street? EastEnders has never had that really light and fluffy. When they've kind of tried to do comedy, it's been very difficult for them. So a darker, much more sinister path has always been EastEnders' way. So for me, I think Kate Oates perhaps is perfect for the role. I mean, when Kate Oates first took the reins, it was quite an instant change, and it was notable. John York kind of was building the foundations for the soap. Kate Oates kind of then said, right, this is what we want to do with the soap, and then handed the reins over to John Sen to say, right, here's what I want you to do, now you take over and get on with it. I think it's a team effort, and I think it's a bit unfair to single perhaps Kate Oates out to say she's going to ruin it over perhaps the team ruining it. I'm perhaps overcomplicating it a bit too much, my point. Well, of course, there's a counter argument to it's going to be ruined because she's ruined Coronation Street too. At Chatterbox 2018 said, I agree, Corrie did go a little bit too far to the dark side, which isn't really why most people watch it. But that's not to say these storylines weren't great or important to tell. Her style definitely suits EastEnders. And at Soap Wiki John says, in my opinion, she did an amazing job with Corrie, but she lacked balance. Corrie's storyline quality was amazing, but the show was very dark. Her style fits EastEnders perfectly. Yes, exactly. Her style is probably more suited for EastEnders than it ever would have been suited for Coronation Street. It worked for Coronation Street, so it should, in theory, work for EastEnders too. More comments from Twitter. At Ronnie Roxy 2 has said, inconsistent, too many random characters going nowhere. I still long for a Chrissy Watts return. In fact, imagine they are actually able to get Michelle Ryan back as Zoe Slater and Kim Metcalf as Sam Mitchell. Yes! Imagine if they can get them back. I would love that. Kim Metcalf as Sam Mitchell, I've already said I would love her to come back as Sam Mitchell. For me, she is my Sam Mitchell. Daniela Westbrook was, of course, the real original, but it's a bit like Janine. Janine was never always played by Charlie Brooks, but for me, she is the Janine Butcher. Daniela Westbrook isn't my Sam Mitchell, Kim Metcalf is. So yes, going completely off topic, but yes, bringing them both back, especially Sam. And I think Sam has a place on the show again, for me. I think she really does. I think she'd be really interesting. It'd be fun for her and Jack, perhaps, with Denise. Anyway, got nothing to do with it. Let's talk about the first part, the very first word of this tweet, that it's inconsistent. And yes, for a part, you're right. The soap has become a little bit blah. So stories have a beginning, a middle, and an end. And stories in this era seems to have a beginning and a middle and doesn't necessarily have that end. It doesn't have that payoff. First of all, they seem to just press the reset button and have done with it and say, nope, it never happened. Just forget about it. Human trafficking, anyone? Other times they drop it, bring it up occasionally, but it's not important enough to kind of be carried on. And then the third one is that they do remember the story, but they don't give it the gravitas or the importance that really it needs to be moved on with. We will be talking about later on about how they overuse cast members too. But it's the fact that they have a story, something they could really potentially do really well, and has pulled in an audience, and then they're kind of not really doing anything about it. I don't really want to use this as an example, but it seems to be a good example, and that is Ballum. With Ballum, they had this really great Genesis story for Ben and Callum, and it was fascinating. It was done very quickly, but it didn't seem to hinder the audience, and they seemed to enjoy it. Now, they don't, it just seems to kind of just something happens and then doesn't, and then they get together and they break up, and it just seems to be the same old. I want to see their relationship. I don't want it to be a sensationalist story. I want it to be a relationship story between them both and how they're growing to become one and know each other. And this is Callum's first proper relationship outside when he's been openly gay, and that would be interesting to investigate too. It's like they're using sensationalism over substance. At me on it, comment below, let me know what you think. Thank you for your comment at MattDummers36, who said, I want a Cora return. The show is lacking a strong older female character. I never understood why Dominic Treadwell-Collins acts the character of Cora. She was EastEnders through and through. Again, not really Oates and Sen's fault, but I'm picking up on this, that you're saying that perhaps Oates and Sen could introduce the Monarch character. I have to say, I think they are making Sonia a very interestingly strong kind of Monarch. She reminds me of Pauline Fowler, and the way she kind of lords it over her family a little bit. She did it with Bex wanting to go travelling, but eventually reeled it in and decided okay, enough is enough. And she does it with Martin, trying to protect him all the time. I have to say, yes, I'm seeing that with Sonia, and I've seen it mostly since Oates and Sen have started producing the show. Sharon is obviously an obvious choice as well, but unfortunately, by losing her 13-year-old child, they've kind of taken that luxury away. So now we have the elephant in the room, not the cat, and that is that old music and sound effects. It probably is the most Marmite conversation on social media about what is ruining or what is improving EastEnders. Let's read some comments from what you said. At Walford Web said, stuff like the Linda montage with music last week is very Hollyoaks. I don't buy the it has to change and evolve line when the formula worked for 34 years. EastEnders is supposed to reflect real life, and real life doesn't have a soundtrack. That's EastEnders brand and established style. We'll be talking more about the Hollyoaks style a little bit later on the video too. At A343 replied and said, oh, I love the use of effects and different techniques in filming. EastEnders was stale in its style and has to evolve. I disagree with those who say it's like Hollyoaks is nothing like it. And at Izzy Field then continued and said, also, whoever's in charge of the sound effects needs to be fired as soon as possible. I honestly don't mind the incidental music occasionally. The music played on the Thames on Friday's episode was beautiful and really added to it. Friday's episode is the boat episode, and that's an example I immediately will jump onto. The music they played when Whitney admitted to stabbing, she didn't murder, she stabbed, was brilliant. When they were taking them all out of the water, it was the complete aftermath, everyone was saved, but Dennis. I thought that was perfect. And another example I'm going to use is a bit further back, was when Mel was escaping the club with Hunter. She needed to keep him returning as a secret because she escaped, because he escaped from a prison van, and he had some wounds and she had to take him to a doss house to get better. They used music for him to do the escape. They also used slow motion effects, and I really liked it. Ben and I talk about it all the time on the podcast, and he is of the complete opposing view. This is what I mean. It is entirely Marmite, this comment. You either love it or you hate it. There's no in between, I don't think. And Ben hates it. Ben absolutely hates it. He thinks every time incidental music comes onto the episode, onto a scene, or when there's a sound effect being used, he just thinks it's hand-holding and that you're being guided to how you should feel emotionally. I disagree. I think it can embody the scene better and make it a much more rounder scene, and it helps the audience absorb it and take it in, I think. It makes it a more memorable moment. That's why I remember that moment with Mel so well. That's very much an Oates and Sen thing. Nothing like this has really been done before. This is a whole new ball game, and they're experimenting with it. So back to our Facebook group. Again, thank you guys so much. Details of how to join our Facebook group and also our other social media is back on the screen below. We had a really nice comment from Melanie Williams. I enjoyed the directing style. They've brought very current subject matter, e.g. the stalking, Ollie's long wait for and ASD assessment. And then the fallout of that with Linda's drinking. Defo loving Keegan's police profile storyline. We cannot forget Shaquille's death. That was shot so beautifully. Oh my god, how can I forget the Pride episode just as Callum came out? Bex's mental health difficulties, very hot topic, so many to list. Yeah, I mean, they are bringing out those stories quickly. Again, I think we'll talk about a little bit later on. Loads of kind of, as Ben again on the podcast would say, kitchen sink moments. Stories that are heartfelt, are reflective on society, and ones that you can really sink your teeth into. I mean, I've said it just before, obviously John Sen and Kate Oates are using quite sensationalist stories in order to get in an audience, a younger audience perhaps. This is the streaming age after all. I think keeping them in by doing stories which people can relate and sink their teeth into. And if you watch social media after an episode of EastEnders has aired, they tend to be the stories that people talk about more than the sensationalist ones. Moving on from that comment, James Reed, also on our Facebook group, had wrote, from Jean's cancer to Ballum to Pride to Siege Week to Mel's death to Linda's alcoholism to the boat crash. Big blockbuster storylines which have highs and lows and everything in between. Something that was severely lacking in 2016-2018 period. The O'Connor years were desperately dire, which kind of makes us back a little bit if we're going to quickly backtrack, back and forth. I hope you're keeping up. The Connor years, he was trying to bring back a sense of realism to EastEnders, which was community and family, which was admirable, which is what EastEnders has been built on. but it didn't work. And so it goes to show that perhaps if we went backwards, I don't think we're going to end up getting that audience back. We need to move forwards in order to. And again, Senna notes seem to, I think, reflect that quite well. He does go on to say, one of the most distinct changes as soon as Kate Oates took over was how incredibly busy every episode became. Loads of characters and loads of stories popping up left, right and centre. That's really true. One of the first things Ben and I said when you could see her name at the end of an episode saying executive producer was that the market looked so full of people. The cafe looked like it was actually being used. And people weren't being segregated, or characters, weren't being segregated from one another. They were being merged together, even if it was just a passing hello. And I think we talk about that a little bit later on with block storytelling. Just to quickly touch on it, the fact that their whole programme, all soaps, are really about community and this small close-knit group of people and how they live their lives together was getting lost because people were getting separated and segregated, and now everyone's back together again. And it's never been shown any better, as a great example, as Boat Week or the Vic Siege Week. You know, all the characters are in the Vic together, and you never would have seen that 2 years ago. So a few examples, I suppose, of the character-driven plot stories, and also not relying on one character, which I again touched on earlier. On our Facebook group, Ryan Jones said, as a long-term watcher of 5 years, I noticed that they are taking more risks now with different styles of direction. Obviously no longer have block storytelling, which I touched on just now, telling but all stories sort of loosely linked together. However, at Tiff Firestarter says that she thinks that they're lacking a lot of direction at the moment in terms of where the show is going. Characters just float around and doing nothing. A lot of stories are just there at times. It's good, but it could be better and needs more character-driven rather than plot. EastEnders has always been about characters, and you're right, completely, entirely right. It needs to be more about characters. Counterpoint of what I said earlier, that is that these big sensationalist stories are pulling in the audience, is that they're then foregoing any kind of remembering what a character was. Dark Martin being an example of this. Martin Fowler, I don't think we could have ever imagined would have done what he did for 3 months of 2019, at the end of 2019. It seemed incredibly out of character for him. This programme is built on characters, and perhaps this is something that is lacking some guidance at the moment. At Sean Wales _ says, they've improved the show, but I feel they peaked at the Vic Siege. Everything before that was amazing, and everything since that hit and miss. They need to go back to balancing the cast out and get rid of the gangster storylines. A lot of character decisions haven't been making sense either. One of the thing about having so many good cast members that could have a story is that you're then risking that a lot of them are just kind of floating around and there's nothing for them to do. There's an argument for that you could introduce more episodes in the week. So then if you have more characters, there's more for them to do. I wouldn't want that to happen, but Kate Oates did introduce the 6th episode of Coronation Street to ITV. So perhaps they might introduce a 5th or perhaps even a 6th episode onto the BBC. That's not something we know yet. So final 2 comments, the first one from our Facebook group from Emma Ray. It's in a far better position than it has been for years. It certainly is. That's true. Let's stop there for a second and agree to that. Let's all agree that this show has been much, much improved from 2 years ago, 3 years ago, 4 years ago. When we first started doing the podcast, which was 2 years ago, we were finding it difficult to fill up an hour and a half, and now we find it difficult to not fill up an hour and a half and have to take things away for the podcast. Emma continues, it has moved with the times and become a more recognisable version of the East End I know. That's interesting actually, because there's still a huge criticism that there's not enough ethnic groups on the show, but I think the stories are becoming better and more reflective, so yeah, great. However, as you mentioned, the Hollyoaks era is also doing my head in. It's losing the down and dirty realism and is playing to a certain crowd who I don't actually think are their core audience. First of all, you cannot pander to your core audience, because if you do, your show will die. You need to keep bringing in young blood. For a soap, when it's continuous, I think you do need to keep bringing back in audience, especially a young audience, because if you've got someone who's watching it at 16 years old, hopefully then they're going to carry on watching it until they're 60 years old. But stories have come and gone at a breakneck speed on this era, and it's worrying how quickly they're coming and going. So I'm going to use Boat Week and Christmas of 2019 as an example. Both of those were utilising the Shianu story and how the fallout of the Mitchells was going to occur from it. Because they had the 35th anniversary, so it wasn't necessarily their fault, they had to do a big story. And to be fair, the 35th anniversary was fantastic. I doffed my cap to them. Everything, writers, cast, everything, everyone, the producers did a brilliant job with the Boat Week. But Christmas Week became a bit of an afterthought. Not necessarily though because of that 35th anniversary. It's because they introduced stories after Mel's death. So there was like 2 weeks to build on a story for what should be attractive time to pull in an audience for a soap that perhaps hasn't been watched for a long time. And so this is what we mean, I think, by the Hollyoaks era. It's happening a lot more. They seem to be doing 2-week blocks of very quick stories and then they're forgotten about, and then 2 weeks and forgotten about. It's worrying that they're losing their longer arcs to compensate for doing lots of little shorter arcs. And the only long arc, which is the Sharon and Dennis one, potentially, and the Ian getting found out, is already kind of starting to end now anyway. And then this could then cause a lot of people to argue, well, why did you kill off Dennis, this legacy character, just to do this very short story with him? So that's what we mean by the Hollyoaks era. The stories are very short. Yes, they're concise, but perhaps they're worryingly so throwaway too. Someone on Twitter says, at Coco Kells, they ruined Shianu, made it the Ben show, love shoving people in boots, love abandoned warehouses, kill off Denny with shocking aftermath, and have obviously employed a new sound man who gets to be happy with the buttons. I do not like this era. It's a shame actually I'm ending on a sour note. I didn't realise that was the last one I picked when I was doing notes and so on and so forth. There's a few things that we need to pick out from that. One of the criticisms of Kate Oates is that she's basically taking stories from the past and from when she was on Coronation Street, copying them and then pasting them onto the show. She knows they work, and so she can just do them again and everyone's happy. There has been examples of that. If you're watching classic EastEnders at the moment, a lot of things that have been happening in 1991 and 1992 are happening again. Sharon Gate, Shianu, Tiff, elope and go and get married. There's probably plenty of other examples too. But Kate Oates has also been caught out for doing storylines which she did with Coronation Street, which is fine because obviously they've been done on Coronation Street, so they've not been done on EastEnders. But can you not do something a little bit new and original? And one last thing Kel says is that it's the Ben show. Something I'm going to quickly say is that there's been a lot of criticism that Ben seems to be the linchpin, the nucleus of everyone else's story around the square, that they're focusing too much on Ben Mitchell to carry out stories for everyone else. So his death storyline is also linked with Jay and Lola, and also linked with Callum, and also linked with Kathy. The storyline with Mitchells was linked with Sharon and Phil, and so it's all about how Ben is coping in the situation and how the characters around him are coping with him. Yes, I suppose they are relying on him a bit too heavily, and I think they've done that in the past. They did it with the Carters. I think all in all, a lot of people are saying very positive things, as I said earlier on in the video. For the little bits they've done wrong, there's been a lot that they've done right, and it's a really enjoyable show. It's really exciting to watch again. But perhaps I've said something that you don't agree with, perhaps I've said something you do agree with, perhaps there's something I've not said at all. Get in touch with us on our social media. You can also comment below on the YouTube channel. Don't forget, we have a podcast that comes out every Sunday talking about the week that's just happened on EastEnders. We also have a spoiler cast that comes out on our YouTube channel every Tuesday, and we have original content video that comes out every Thursday. I've been Alex, and thanks for joining me.